"He's buried alive!" the little girl shouted, pointing towards the cemetery. Then, as they dug up the freshly closed tomb during the burial service, everyone heard something that made even the gravediggers weep. Rate my story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The afternoon sun of March beat down on the dusty streets of Willow Creek when 4-year-old Izzy ran desperately toward the town cemetery. Her bare, dirty feet could barely keep up with the urgency she felt in her chest. A strange sensation she couldn't explain, but that pulled her like an invisible force. People walking along the sidewalks moved aside as they saw her approach, a small, thin girl with disheveled hair and torn clothes that betrayed her days spent on the streets of the town. At that moment, the funeral of Anthony "Tony" Miller, a respected local businessman, gathered dozens of people at the cemetery. Grieving family members and close friends crowded around the freshly opened grave, where the coffin was being lowered slowly by the gravediggers. Father O'Malley led the final prayers, his solemn voice echoing among the ancient trees that shaded the sacred ground. It was a moment of respectful farewell, of silent mourning, and reflection on a life that had ended. That's when Izzy burst through the crowd, screaming with a force that didn't seem to belong to her fragile little body. "Someone's buried alive! Someone's buried alive!" Her words cut through the air like a knife, abruptly interrupting the ceremony and causing a murmur of shock among those present. The girl pointed frantically at the grave that was being closed, her large, frightened eyes fixed on the earth that was beginning to cover the coffin. Benjamin "Ben" Thompson, a 52-year-old entrepreneur and owner of the largest trucking company in the region, was among those present, offering his condolences to the Miller family. A tall and imposing man, always dressed in impeccable suits, Ben had built his fortune with hard work and unwavering determination. His graying hair was combed precisely, and his brown eyes carried the hardness of someone who had faced many battles to get where he was. At that moment, he observed the scene with a mixture of irritation and curiosity, without imagining that this street kid would change his life forever. "Get that child out of here," someone muttered in the crowd. "What disrespect for the deceased's family." But Izzy continued screaming, her tears mixing with the dust that covered her small face. There was something in her desperation that struck a deep chord in the hearts of those present, a raw sincerity that was impossible to ignore. That's when Carol Smith, Ben's sister, and a 50-year-old retired nurse, approached the girl with careful steps. Carol had always had a heart for those in need, dedicating her last years to volunteering with abandoned children in the town's shelters. Her light hair was tied in a simple bun, and her hands, calloused from work, demonstrated years of dedication to caring for others. She knelt before Izzy, looking directly into her frightened eyes. "What are you seeing, honey?" Carol asked in a soft voice, ignoring the murmurs of disapproval around her. Izzy grabbed her hand with desperate force, her small fingers trembling with fear and anxiety. "He's not dead. He's knocking!" the girl cried, now pointing to a neighboring older grave where the name of Jimmy Thompson was engraved. The date on the tombstone indicated that he had been buried 3 months earlier, at the age of 16. Ben felt the blood run cold in his veins. Jimmy was his youngest son, who had disappeared without a trace after a violent argument about the direction of his life. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone present knew the story of Jimmy Thompson's disappearance, the rebellious son of the town's most powerful businessman. The young man had been declared dead after months of fruitless searches, and his funeral had taken place with the coffin sealed, as the body was never found. The family had tried to move on, but the pain of the loss remained like an open wound in everyone's heart. "This is absurd," said Gabe Thompson, Ben's eldest son, a 28-year-old man with hard features and an ambition that rivaled his father's. "Jimmy's been dead for 3 months, everyone knows that. This girl's delirious." Gabe always prided himself on his rationality and practicality, characteristics that he considered essential for the business world. His dark hair was always well cut, and his expensive suits reflected his position in the family company. But something in Izzy's persistence made people begin to question their certainties. The girl continued pointing to Jimmy's grave, her sobs echoing through the cemetery like an ancestral lament. "Listen, please listen," she pleaded, her voice hoarse from so much shouting. That's when someone in the crowd said they heard a strange sound. Then another. Soon several people claimed to hear faint knocks coming from beneath the earth, exactly from the grave that Izzy indicated. The sound was almost imperceptible, as if someone was desperately trying to communicate their presence through meters of compacted earth. Donna Thompson, Ben's wife and mother of Gabe and Jimmy, fainted upon hearing the knocking. An elegant 45-year-old woman, always impeccably dressed and made up, Donna had spent the last 3 months in deep mourning, taking medication to be able to sleep and rarely leaving the house. Her blonde hair was always kept perfect, hiding the emotional fragility that had consumed her since the disappearance of her youngest son. At that moment, her world was collapsing again. The pressure from the crowd grew with each passing second. People who had known Jimmy since childhood, neighbors who participated in the searches, family friends who offered support during the difficult months, all demanded that the grave be opened immediately. Father O'Malley tried to calm tempers, but even he seemed shaken by the unusual situation that unfolded before his eyes. Ben, a man accustomed to making quick and decisive decisions in his business, found himself paralyzed by the terrifying possibility that his son might be alive, buried in that grave for 3 long months. His hands trembled slightly, a vulnerability that he rarely allowed others to see. The pain he had tried to bury, along with the hopes of finding Jimmy, returned with full force, mixed now with a spark of hope that he feared to nurture. The grave diggers, pressured by the growing crowd and the moral authority of the situation, finally began to dig. Each strike of the shovel echoed through the cemetery like a heartbeat, marking the time of a hope that hung between life and impossibility. Izzy remained beside Carol, her eyes fixed on the earth that was being removed, as if she knew exactly what they would find down there. The first shovel of earth revealed only the expected emptiness of the grave, but the knocks continued to echo, now clearer and more desperate. The crowd moved even closer, forming a tight circle around the gravediggers who worked feverishly. Ben held Donna, who had regained consciousness but remained in a state of shock, her glazed eyes fixed on the hole that grew with each movement of the tools. When they finally reached Jimmy's coffin, the silence was absolute. With trembling hands, the gravediggers opened the wooden lid, revealing the completely empty interior. There was no body, no clothes, only the white satin lining that should have welcomed the young man's remains. The discovery caused a murmur of shock and confusion among those present, but the knocks did not cease. "The sound's coming from below," shouted one of the gravediggers, pressing his ear to the bottom of the coffin. "There's something under here." The revelation made everyone mobilize even more, and soon other tools were brought to dig beyond the normal depth of the grave. That's when they discovered the impossible. A narrow and poorly excavated tunnel that connected Jimmy's empty grave to an abandoned crypt a few meters away. The hole was so small that only a thin person could pass through it, and signs of fresh earth indicated that it had been dug recently. The knocks came clearly from inside that improvised tunnel. "Jimmy! Jimmy!" shouted Ben, throwing himself to his knees on the edge of the excavation. His voice echoed through the dark tunnel, and for a terrifying moment there was only silence. Then a weak and hoarse voice answered from the depths of the earth. "Dad! Dad! Get me out of here!" What followed was the most dramatic rescue that Willow Creek had ever witnessed. Firefighters were called, emergency equipment was brought, and for 2 tense hours a delicate operation was conducted to remove Jimmy from the tunnel where he had remained for 3 months. When they finally brought him to the surface, the young man was unconscious, dehydrated and extremely thin, but alive. Carol, with her medical experience, was one of the first to examine her nephew. Jimmy had lost a lot of weight. His hair was long and dirty, and his body showed clear signs of severe malnutrition. His clothes were the same as on the day he disappeared, now torn and filthy. But he was breathing, his heart was beating, and his eyes moved under his closed eyelids. At Willow Creek General Hospital, the medical team worked tirelessly to stabilize Jimmy. The young man drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering disjointed words that made no sense to anyone. Ben didn't leave his bedside, holding his son's thin hand and whispering words of comfort that he hoped could reach him amid the mental confusion. Donna alternated between moments of ecstatic joy at having her son back and panic attacks when she realized the state he was in. "How did he survive so long?" she repeatedly asked the doctors, who had no definitive answers to offer. During these first days in the hospital, the story began to spread throughout Willow Creek. The street kid who had saved the son of the town's richest businessman became the center of all conversations. Some people called her a miracle, others questioned how such a small child could have known where to find Jimmy. The most absurd theories circulated through the town's bars and squares. Gabe, meanwhile, maintained a skeptical stance regarding the whole episode. "This doesn't make sense," he repeated to anyone who would listen. "How would a 4-year-old girl who lives on the streets know where our brother was? There's something very strange about this story." His distrust was fueled not only by logic, but also by the fear that this event would bring unwanted consequences for the family's reputation. Izzy, for her part, had disappeared after the rescue. Carol had searched for her everywhere, but the girl had returned to the streets, probably frightened by all the commotion she had caused. Abandoned children learned early to hide when situations became too complicated to understand. It was only on the 4th day of hospitalization that Jimmy finally managed to speak coherently. His first moments of lucidity were dedicated to asking for water and food, basic needs that had been his obsession during the months of captivity. But gradually, fragments of memories began to emerge. "There was a woman," he whispered to Carol, who took careful notes of everything her nephew said. "She helped me. Brought food sometimes, had dark hair, very thin. Her hands always trembled." Jimmy closed his eyes, as if the effort of remembering was too painful. "She cried a lot. Said she had a little daughter." Ben leaned closer to the bed. "Where were you, son? Who kept you locked up?" But Jimmy shook his head, confusion still dominating much of his memories. "Crypt. Dark place. Cold. The man came sometimes. Was angry. Very angry with me." "With you too," the young man murmured. "Spoke of work, that you had ruined his life. Walter, I think that was his name." The name hit Ben like a lightning bolt. Walter Gomez had been an employee of the trucking company for almost 10 years, responsible for maintaining the fleet of trucks. Ben had fired him 8 months earlier on suspicion of stealing parts and fuel. The man had left outraged, promising that one day he would take revenge for the injustice he felt he had suffered. But no one imagined that his thirst for revenge could reach such desperate extremes. "He said he was going to make you suffer as he suffered," Jimmy continued, his voice growing stronger as the memories became clearer. "That he was going to take away from you what you loved most, as you took away from him his family's livelihood." The young man began to tremble, reliving the terror of the months in captivity. "But the woman, she didn't agree. Tried to protect me when she could." Carol took more notes, realizing that the description of the mysterious woman could be the key to understanding how Jimmy had managed to survive so long. "Did she give you food regularly?" she asked. "No, only when she could. I think she was afraid of him too," Jimmy replied, "but it was she who taught me to dig. Said that if I always dug in the same direction, I would reach a safe place. That people would find me." He paused, processing his own words. "It took me weeks to make that tunnel. The earth was hard, my hands were bleeding, but she said it was my only chance." The revelation that a woman had helped Jimmy plan his escape raised new questions. Who was she? Why was she with Walter? And more importantly, why had she chosen to help the young man instead of simply running away or reporting the kidnapping? Ben left the hospital that night with more questions than answers. His private investigation firm was already working to locate Walter, but the identity of the mysterious woman remained an enigma. As he drove through the dark streets of Willow Creek, he couldn't stop thinking about the description Jimmy had given. Dark hair, very thin, hands that trembled, a little daughter. It was almost midnight when Ben got home, but he couldn't sleep. He stayed on the porch, looking at the town stretching out before him, thinking about all the lives that crossed paths in mysterious ways. Somewhere out there, a woman had risked her own safety to save his son, and a 4-year-old girl had known exactly where to find him. The next morning, news of Walter Gomez's arrest hit the local papers. The man had been found in a makeshift shelter on the outskirts of town, but adamantly refused to talk about the kidnapping or any accomplices. His only statement was that Ben Thompson had destroyed his family, and he had only returned the favor. About the woman Jimmy had described, Walter remained completely silent. 2 weeks had passed since Jimmy's rescue, and Carol couldn't get the image of Izzy screaming in the cemetery out of her head. The retired nurse had dedicated her last years to working with abandoned children, and something about that girl deeply intrigued her. She decided to use her contacts in the town's shelters to try to locate her, driven by an intuition she couldn't explain. It was at the town's shelter that Carol finally obtained information about Izzy. "Ah, little Izzy," said Mary, the coordinator of the shelter for over 15 years. "She shows up here from time to time, but never stays long. She's a very smart child, but also very scared. She's been living on the street since her mother disappeared almost a year ago." "And the mother? What happened to her?" Carol asked, feeling she was about to discover something important. Mary sighed, flipping through some old papers. "Rose Smith, a sad story, like so many others we see here. Worked for years as a cleaner, but developed a substance abuse problem after she lost her job. The daughter ended up being taken from home by neighbors when the situation became unsustainable." The last name made Carol stop. Smith, the same last name she had before she got married. A strange coincidence that aroused her curiosity even more. "Do you have the address where she worked?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Let me see. Here. She worked for 3 years at the Thompson family mansion in the upscale part of town. She left abruptly, according to the records here. After that, her life completely fell apart." Carol felt her heart race. Rose had worked at her brother Ben's house. The woman Jimmy had described as his savior had worked for her own family. The coincidences were piling up in a way she could no longer ignore. That same afternoon, Carol confronted Ben in his office at the trucking company. The man was immersed in paperwork, trying to recover the business that had been neglected during the crisis with Jimmy. When his sister entered without knocking, he raised his tired eyes. "Ben, I need you to remember an employee of yours. Rose Smith, cleaner, worked at your house for 3 years. Ben paused, the pen suspended over the documents. "Rose? Yes, I remember her. Hard-working woman, very quiet. Donna liked her work." He frowned. "Why are you asking?" "Because she's the mother of the girl who saved Jimmy, and more importantly, I think she was the woman who helped our nephew during his captivity." The silence that followed was heavy. Ben dropped the pen and leaned back in his chair, processing the information. "That doesn't make sense, Carol. Rose left the house years ago. How would she be involved with Walter?" "That's exactly what I need to find out," Carol replied, determined. "Ben, I think there's a lot more to this story than we imagine. A 4-year-old girl doesn't discover an underground tunnel by chance. She must have heard something, seen something." Ben got up and walked to the window, observing the movement of the town below. "Jimmy said the woman spoke about a little daughter. If it really was Rose—" He stopped, a disturbing realization crossing his mind. "Carol, do you think Rose accompanied Walter voluntarily?" "I don't know, but I intend to find out." Carol approached her brother. "Ben, I need your help to find these two. Rose may have answers we need, and Izzy, that child saved your son. We can't just ignore that." As the siblings talked, on the other side of town, Izzy walked through the dirty streets of downtown, carrying a plastic bag with the few belongings she possessed. The girl had learned to move silently between the shadows, avoiding people who might ask questions about her family or try to take her to a shelter. Her mind was still processing the events of the cemetery. She knew there was something special about her ability to feel things that others couldn't, but she didn't completely understand what that meant. Since she was little, she heard voices that came from strange places, saw movements where others saw only emptiness. That's why her mother always said she was special before everything fell apart. That night, Izzy took shelter under a bridge near the river that cut through Willow Creek. It was a place known among street children as relatively safe, away from curious eyes and authorities. It was there that she found Rose. The woman was sitting against one of the bridge's pillars, trembling even in the warm night air. Her dark hair was disheveled, her clothes dirty and torn, showing signs that she had spent weeks living outdoors. When she saw Izzy approach, Rose began to cry. "My daughter, my little one," she whispered, extending her trembling arms toward the girl. I tried so hard." Izzy ran into her mother's arms, feeling a mixture of relief and fear. Rose was visibly debilitated, her eyes showing signs that she had gone through recent traumatic experiences. "Mom, where were you?" the girl asked, nestling in the woman's thin chest. "I did something very important, my daughter," Rose said, kissing Izzy's disheveled hair. "I helped a boy who was suffering a lot, like you were suffering." Her voice was weak, punctuated by sobs. "But now I'm scared, very scared of what might happen to us." During the hours that followed, Rose told her daughter a story that the child couldn't completely understand. She spoke about a bad man who had kidnapped a young man for revenge, about how she had discovered the captivity by chance, about the months in which she tried to help the boy without the kidnapper finding out. "I brought him food when I could," Rose explained, her hands trembling as she remembered. "And when I realized he was getting very weak, I taught him to dig. Said that if he dug in the right direction, he would reach where people could hear him." She looked directly into her daughter's eyes. "But I couldn't report it, Izzy. Walter said that if I told anyone, he would hurt you too." The revelation that Walter had threatened Izzy explained why Rose had remained silent for so long. Her decision to help Jimmy had been an act of desperate courage, trying to save a life without putting her own daughter at risk. "How did you know where he was, honey?" Rose asked, caressing Izzy's small face. "How did you know he was in the cemetery?" Izzy didn't know how to explain. "I heard him calling, Mom. I heard him from far away. It was as if he was calling me to help." The child paused, trying to find words for feelings she didn't understand. "Sometimes I hear things that other people don't hear." Rose nodded, as if that made perfect sense to her. "Your grandmother also had that gift, Izzy. She always knew things she shouldn't know." The woman kissed her daughter's forehead. "That's why you're so special, my little one." The next morning, Carol had managed to locate Rose's last known address through the shelter's records. It was a small and poorly maintained house on the outskirts of town that had been abandoned for months, but the neighbors reported that they had seen a woman and a child in the area recently. It was following these clues that Carol arrived at the bridge where mother and daughter had spent the night. She found the two still sleeping, huddled against each other, sharing the little warmth they had. The scene broke the retired nurse's heart, and she approached slowly so as not to scare them. "Rose," she called softly. The woman woke up startled, instinctively protecting Izzy with her body. "My name is Carol Smith. I'm Ben Thompson's sister. I need to talk to you." The fear that took over Rose's face was instantaneous and devastating. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered, holding Izzy tightly. "I just tried to help." I didn't want anyone to get hurt." "I know," said Carol, sitting on the ground to be at their height. "I know you helped my nephew. I came here to thank you, not to accuse you of anything." She reached out her hand slowly. "But I need to understand what happened. Why were you with Walter? How did all this start?" It was then that Rose began to tell a story that would change everything the Thompson family thought they knew about themselves. With tearful eyes and a trembling voice, Rose began to reveal secrets that had been buried for decades. "Carol, your name always seemed familiar to me when I worked at the Thompsons' house," she said, holding Izzy against her chest. "But only now I understand why. We're sisters." Carol felt the world spin around her. "What are you saying? My real name is Rose Smith Thompson. I was separated from you and Ben when I was only 2 years old," Rose continued, her tears falling on Izzy's hair. "Our parents couldn't support 3 children during the recession of the 80s. Ben was the oldest, you were the middle one, and I was the baby. They gave me to a family of farmers who promised to raise me well." The revelation hit Carol like a lightning bolt. Distant memories began to emerge. Fragments of a little sister playing in the backyard, memories she had always thought were just childhood dreams. Rose, little Rosie who disappeared when I was 5. Exactly. The family that adopted me changed my last name to Smith, but kept my first name. I grew up knowing that I had siblings somewhere, but I never managed to find them. Rose paused, wiping the tears with the back of her dirty hands. "When I got the job at Ben's house 3 years ago, I immediately realized who he was. The same eyes, the same face shape as our father. But he was so important, so rich, and I was just a cleaner with problems." Carol moved closer, reaching out to touch her lost sister's face. "Why did you never say anything? Why did you keep this to yourself for so long?" "Because I was ashamed," Rose confessed, her voice breaking. "When I started working for you, I was struggling with addiction. I tried to stay clean, be a good employee, a good mother to Izzy, but every day it got harder. How could I go to Ben and say, 'Hi, brother, I'm your long-lost sister, but I'm an addict, and I'm destroying my daughter's life?'" The pain in Rose's voice was palpable. Izzy, still sleepy, hugged her mother tighter, feeling the sadness that emanated from her without fully understanding the words exchanged between the two women. "Is that why you left the house so abruptly?" Carol asked, beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. "Yes. One night, Donna found me shaking in the kitchen, clearly in withdrawal. She was kind, offered help, said she could refer me to treatment. But I panicked. I thought that if she found out about my problem, Ben would find out too, and then he might investigate my past." Rose paused, the memory still painful. "I preferred to disappear in the middle of the night rather than risk destroying the image he had of me as a competent employee." "And how did you get involved with Walter?" Carol asked, preparing to hear the most difficult part of the story. Rose closed her eyes, as if she were gathering courage to relive the darkest moments of the last few months. "After I left Ben's house, my life completely fell apart. I lost control over the addiction. Izzy went to live in shelters. I lived on the streets. That's how I met Walter." She explained that Walter was also living a desperate situation after being fired from the trucking company. The man had lost his house. His wife had left him taking the children, and he blamed Ben for all his misfortune. He found out about my past, knew that I had worked for the Thompsons. He said we could help each other. He would give me shelter and food, and I would help him take revenge on Ben. Initially, I thought he only wanted to steal something from the house or cause some financial damage," Rose continued. "I was so desperate, so lost in the addiction, that I agreed without thinking about the consequences. But when I discovered that he had kidnapped Jimmy..." Carol held her breath. "What did you do?" "I tried to convince him to release the boy. I begged, cried, threatened to go to the police, but Walter said that if I said anything he would go after Izzy too. Said he knew where she was, that it was easy to make a street child disappear without anyone noticing." Rose began to tremble again. Then I decided that the only way to save Jimmy was to help him escape on his own. It was like that. During 3 months, Rose brought food hidden to Jimmy whenever she could trick Walter. Taught the young man to dig systematically, explained that if he continued always in the same direction, eventually he would get to a location where he could be heard. I didn't know that he would dig up to get to the grave at the cemetery. I thought that he would exit to some empty land or the backyard of a house. And how did Izzy know where to find him? Carol asked, still intrigued with that aspect of the story. Rose looked at the daughter with a mix of pride and sadness. Izzy always had that gift. Since she was little, she perceived things that others couldn't. Her grandmother, my adoptive mother, said that it was a very developed intuition, almost like she could see the future. Connect with people's suffering. She kissed the girl's head. I think she sensed that Jimmy was in danger, even without consciously knowing what was happening. Carol spent the rest of the morning processing all these revelations. When she finally took Rose and Izzy to her own house, she knew she would have a very difficult conversation with Ben. The family he thought he knew had become much more complex in a matter of hours. That afternoon, in the trucking company office, Carol told Ben everything. The businessman listened in absolute silence, his face going through a range of emotions. Surprise, disbelief, anger, sadness, and finally a deep guilt that consumed him completely. She worked in my house for 3 years, Carol. 3 years, and I didn't recognize my own sister, he said, his voice laden with self-reproach. How could I be so blind, so oblivious to the suffering of someone in my own family? Ben, you were children when you were separated, and she's changed a lot over the years, Carol tried to console him. The important thing is that we know the truth now. But Ben couldn't forgive himself. While I was building my fortune, my sister was living on the streets. While I was worrying about profits and business expansion, she was fighting addiction and losing her daughter to the system. And when she finally had the courage to work for me, I didn't even really see her. Gabe and Donna reacted in completely different ways to the revelation. Donna, still emotionally fragile from the experience with Jimmy, showed herself to be understanding and willing to help. Ben, if Rose helped our son survive, she's real family, blood or not, she said. Gabe, on the other hand, exploded in fury. This is absurd. An addict who got involved with my brother's kidnapper now comes to say she's our aunt, and you're going to believe that? He paced nervously around the room. Dad, she may be lying to get money. She may be trying to take advantage of our gratitude. Gabe, Ben said firmly, Rose saved your brother's life. She risked her own safety and her daughter's to protect Jimmy. That's worth more than any DNA test. But Gabe wasn't convinced. And the girl? Do you really believe that a 4-year-old child has supernatural powers? That's ridiculous. It was Jimmy who resolved the argument. The young man had recovered enough to leave the hospital, and when he learned of the discovery about Rose and Izzy, insisted on seeing them immediately. She saved me, he said simply when Gabe tried to argue. When I was ready to give up, to die in that dark hole, she gave me hope. And the girl, I don't know how to explain it, but when I saw her in the cemetery, I was sure everything would be okay. That night, Ben made a decision that would change everything. He arrived at Carol's house, where Rose and Izzy were temporarily staying, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents. Rose, he said, sitting before his lost sister, I want you and Izzy to come live with me. I want to take care of you both, as I should have done a long time ago. Rose began to cry again. Ben, I don't deserve this. I did terrible things. I got involved with dangerous people. You saved my son, he interrupted. You're my sister. That's all that matters now. He looked at Izzy, who watched the conversation with her big, intelligent eyes. And this little one, she brought my family back to me. 6 months later, everyone's life had changed dramatically. Rose was in treatment for addiction, attending therapy regularly, and slowly regaining her physical and mental health. Izzy, now living in the Thompson mansion, attended a private school, but maintained her determined personality and her special sensitivity. Ben had used resources from his company to create an assistance program for homeless children in Willow Creek, naming Carol as coordinator and Rose, when she felt ready, as a counselor. The program had helped dozens of families in just a few months. Gabe gradually began to accept the new family reality, especially when he saw how Izzy brought genuine joy to the house. The girl had a unique way of seeing the world that fascinated even him. Jimmy recovered completely from the physical trauma, but maintained a special connection with Izzy, whom he considered his younger sister. The two often talked about things that adults couldn't understand, a language of souls that had gone through extraordinary experiences. Walter was convicted of kidnapping and remained silent about his motives until the end. But his arrest brought a definitive relief for the entire family, who could finally move on without fear. At the end of a year, during a family dinner, Ben raised his glass in a toast. "To Izzy," he said, looking at the girl who was sitting between Rose and Jimmy, "who taught us that family is not built only with blood, but with love, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for those we love." Izzy smiled, her eyes shining with the strange wisdom of a child who had lived experiences beyond her age. Deep in her heart, she knew that she had finally found the home she had always sought, and that her special ability to feel things had served not only to save Jimmy, but to reunite a family that fate had separated long ago. The story of the street kid who saved the businessman's son became a legend in Willow Creek, but for the Thompson family, it was simply the story of how love can overcome any obstacle, any distance, any lost time. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.